Okay. All right, welcome everybody. My name is Cameron Rudy. I am the interim managing director here at the National Coalition for Community Capital, also known as NC3. Today, our webinar is on diversified community investment funds. And if you're not familiar with NC3, our mission is to educate, advocate, and activate community capital. And we define community capital as a set of strategies that allows people from of any economic status to invest in their community. We also have 4 principles of community capital that guide the work that we do. And if you are not already on our newsletter, we encourage you to join so you can keep up with the work that we're doing. And if you are really excited about the work that we're doing, we also encourage you to become a member. And I will drop that link in the chat in just a moment. So really excited that you all are here. I wanted to address a couple housekeeping things before we get started. So like I said, this is set up as a meeting instead of a webinar, which means that you have control of your mute button, but also that comes with great responsibility. Just be mindful of that mute button. We've all been there. We've all made that mistake. But if somebody is talking, please just keep track of your mute. You also have control over the view that you have of the speakers, which can be controlled with the right side of your screen. You can put it on speaker view or gallery view and see everyone else that's here today with us. Let's see. We have also allotted about an hour and a half for this. If you only have an hour to hang with us, that's okay. Most of the content will be covered in that hour, but we're inviting you to stick around for questions and answers afterwards if you have them, or if you just want to hang in here what others have to ask. We are recording this, and we will be sending out the recording to those who have registered and participated today, along with some additional materials as well. And I think that is everything. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it over to Chris Miller, who is one of our founding board members and the current board chair of NC3. And yeah, Chris, you want to take it from here?
Thank you very much, Cameron. It's great to see many of you, or in some cases, your logo, which all of those look attractive. So we appreciate that. And thank you for being here. I wanted to take just a minute to kind of set the stage for what our main speaker is going to talk about. That's Brian Beckon, actually the only remaining founding board member that has survived to this point from NC3. We have others who shucked us off early, like Michael Schumann, who's in the room. But we think of that in a very generous way. So he had other things to focus on. We were really glad he was there at the outset. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about NC3 and kind of what work we've done since our outset. And I'm going to share my screen, Cameron. Let me know if that works.
Yep.
Fantastic. Thank you, Cameron. Oh, no, that was Brian. Thank you, Brian.
Yep.
Yes, it's worth.
I get you guys confused. So anyway, so we really appreciate everybody being here. I wanted to kind of note a couple of folks in particular, and we have at least representation from one of them and the other one here with us. And that is Michael Schumann. I want to begin with, I gave him a little bit of grief at the front end, but Michael was one of the very first people out in the field talking to corn because he couldn't get audiences. And then he started getting audiences, and he's gotten audiences all over the country and all over the world in this space. And I wanted to recognize, Michael, your work and how it's really led us to this place that we are right now. You referenced in a conversation earlier this week, you were talking about kind of the opportunities for us to organize together. And this, I think, is one of those spaces where we can start talking to each other in a much more robust way about things which can help us all move forward and really get to the core reason that we're doing this work. And so I appreciate that. I'm going to reference the other one in a minute that I also wanted to reference as a kind of a special note of appreciation. So investment crowdfunding obviously has really energized the local capital movement, the community capital movement. Certainly not the only way to do it, as especially our friends at Cutting Edge Counsel will tell you, who were working in the direct public offering space long before the Jobs Act was even a gleam in anybody's eye. But it has also been our goal all the way along to advocate and promote the use of funds. We know that we need to have funds for a variety of reasons, certainly diversification, risk mitigation, and in particular, maybe ease of use. So what we did in the very early days, the first bullet point was we got some grant funding, and Brian and Michael and some others who were on our board originally put together a really great document, a how-to guide for building local wealth, equity, and justice community investment funds. And of course, in that process, that team and others did a deep dive into the Investment Company Act of 1940 and found out that most of those funds are very difficult to do what's really fundamental for us, which is building wealth for non-accredited investors. In fact, it's well nigh impossible on the investor side using any of the existing structures for non-accredited investors to build wealth. So that seems significantly problematic. What we did in response to that was prepare a proposal for the SEC to create what we call the 21st Century Community Investment Fund that did all the things we want a fund to do. So it gave local control. It allowed non-accredited investors to invest alongside accredited investors. It allowed for wealth building. It allowed for equity and returns, et cetera, et cetera. So that proposal we submitted to the SEC actually twice, over 2 years ago in the fall, and then updated in the spring, just about 2 years ago now. At the time we submitted it, we were relatively optimistic because we'd seen some great forward-looking and forward movement by the SEC. Since then, not so much. And so one of the things that we did in response to that lack of response from the SEC was to also reach out to the Senate Banking Committee that has the stated goal of increasing the number of retail investors. The retail investors, of course, is the lovely sounding word that sounds a lot better than non-accredited investors, but that's who they're talking about. We've only seen one draft of what they produced. They did not have our 21st Century Community Investment Fund as part of that draft, so we're still working on that side of it. And to that end, those of you that have political power, we would love to talk to you. We're going to make another go at advancing the idea of building a really ideal community investment fund structure in Washington, D.C. So get in touch with Cameron or any of us so that we can help move that forward. In any event, we also really inspired, and this is the other special call out, by the Boston Impact Initiative, Deborah Fries and company. We looked at what they did with charitable loan funds and we said, wow, if they can figure out how to do all that amazing stuff using charitable loan funds, then maybe we can find a way, a workaround to create something that's more close to a community investment fund than what we have now. And so thanks, Deborah, and your team there for inspiring us to dig deep. And that really brings me to the place right now where we talk about the Diversified Community Investment Fund. That is that workaround. So the DCIF, and Brian's going to talk about it in great detail today and withstand incredibly challenging questions you're going to present to him, I'm sure. I've bullet pointed the things that we like best about the Diversified Community Investment Fund structure. So number one, wealth building for non-accredited investors, providing opportunities where we haven't had opportunities in the past. Number two, multiple capital raising strategies are available in this structure, including public raises. Number three, it's scalable, up and most importantly, down. So many of our smaller communities, effectively today, less than 50,000 people in a community, no way to support a fund, no way to run a government, no way to run a local economy from our perspective. So we like that it can scale down. The fund itself can stand alone, or it can be part of other organizations or even governments. We're having some interesting conversations in Michigan right now about governments hosting funds. And speaking of governance, we like the fact that you can have very messy cap tables with this kind of a fund and very messy governance. We're in favor of messy cap tables and messy governance at NC3. There are some liquidity options, including some that are just moving out into the marketplace right now that can be included in it. And again, did we mention that wealth building for non-accredited investors? I hope so. So that's all important for us. So again, thanks very much for being here. I appreciate the organization. We appreciate your support and participation. Let's work together and do amazing things. Over to you, Brian.
Well, thank you, Chris. Let's see, I will share my screen now. And while I get this going, I just want to acknowledge I'm sitting in Concord, California, the land of the Bay Miwok people. And let me get to my PowerPoint. Here you go. All good? You see that? All right. Okay, so yeah. By the way, thanks everyone for being here. This is great, and I just want to acknowledge there's a number of lawyers on the webinar, and that's a little intimidating because most of you know way more than I do about most things. So I'm going to try to stay within the sphere of stuff that I know something about, but bear with me. Nobody knows everything about anything. So if you ask the stumpers, I may just tell you I just don't know, but I'm going to do my best. So here we go. So let's talk about community investment funds. And by the way, I'm going to approach this sort of as a start big picture and then drill down and give some other examples of strategies under the Investment Company Act. So I will get to the diversified community investment funds specifically, but I'm going to start with some general stuff before I get there. Okay. So what is community capital? Okay. So some of this Chris has already talked about, Chris or Cameron. But yes, community capital is investment capital. So we're not talking about philanthropic money in the sense of donations and grants. We're talking about investment where people expect to get their money back with hopefully a return on investment. So investment raised publicly. So we're not talking about private offerings, publicly from a broad cross-section of a venture's own community. So that including anyone with money to invest. In other words, we're not, as Chris suggested, we're not limiting it to accredited investors. So private offerings, sort of by definition, are not community capital. Now they can play a role in a longer term process that will eventually raise community capital. So there's nothing wrong with raising capital privately, at least in the initial stages of a venture. But fundamentally, private offerings are not community capital. We're talking about public offerings that can be openly advertised that anybody can invest in with a focus on your own community. And broadly speaking, we'll talk about a lot of different strategies, but broadly speaking, a venture, say a local whatever business, local brewery, restaurant, laundromat or whatever, can raise capital can raise community capital, generally two different ways, one directly and the other indirectly through a community investment fund, where the fund itself raises community capital and then provides that financing to local ventures. We're going to be talking mostly about the latter. The former on too much today. We're really focused on funds here. And then just briefly, I think Chris talked about some of this, but why is this important? Why do we focus on community capital? Well, for the reasons, again, Chris talked about, everybody can participate in wealth building. So the idea, our main impulse here is to democratize the economy. Let everybody plug into the economy, not just as consumers or workers feeding the machine, but as investors, being able to get the benefits of the economy. We want everybody to be an investor because that's how you build wealth. You can't build wealth by being a consumer. You can hardly build wealth by working harder. You build wealth by investing. And we want everyone to be able to build wealth, long-term intergenerational wealth. And so regardless of your economic status. And meanwhile, when we build these mechanisms for community capital, the projects that get funded are the kinds of projects that local people want to see succeed. In other words, you are bringing control to the community as far as who gets funded, what gets funded. You're not leaving those decisions in the hands of people far away in wealthy gated communities somewhere else or Wall Street. You're putting those decisions in the hands of the people that you're serving. So the communities evolve in the way that the people in that community want it to evolve. And then when you do all that, profits from those ventures circulate locally. You get the multiplier effect. Michael Schumann has talked at length about the multiplier effect, and as Chris did, I want to acknowledge Michael Schumann's kind of the godfather of community capital. I've got a couple of his books right here at my fingertips. By the way, the books behind me, that's virtual, but I actually do have a bookshelf here. Some of them written by Michael Schumann, and I recommend them. So yeah, circulate money locally. It generates more economic activity, and you're helping to build a thriving, resilient local economy. All right, and now that brings us to community investment funds. Why a fund? Any venture can raise capital directly through regulation crowdfunding, direct public offerings, or what have you. So why put this intermediary? Some might say, isn't that putting a middleman in the middle take some efficiency out? Well, yes, there are some downsides, but there are also major upsides. A fund can be more scalable. It can raise any amount of money in one offering and deploy it in multiple projects, versus individual ventures having to jump through all the hoops to do their own securities offering, which many ventures just don't want to do for all kinds of reasons: bandwidth, legal costs, making their financial statements public. Some people just don't want to do that. But a fund can do that and then channel the money in a scalable and efficient way. And it's efficient from a venture's point of view. It's also efficient from an investor's point of view. If I'm an investor, I want to invest locally. Yes, I can review the crowdfunding profiles for 5 or 10 different local offerings, but I don't have the time to do that, or perhaps the inclination to read 10 different Form Cs and decide if this is really something I want to invest $1,000 in. I'd rather hand it off to a professional who will do that. So it's efficient from an investor's point of view to have someone doing the due diligence, and I just invest in the fund and leave it to them. Naturally, it's more diversified because the fund has multiple investments in its portfolio. And as Chris suggested, it does offer the potential, at least, for greater liquidity than individual ventures can. Now, that's a whole conversation. We won't delve too deeply into liquidity, but let's just put it out there. There are more opportunities for liquidity in a fund. So now let's talk about the legal framework. Securities lawyers tend to be pretty familiar with the 1933 Securities Act and all the state blue sky laws. That's in the blue, not square, what is that, hexagon there? That's what they teach in law school. That's what a lot of folks know and love. And that is an important part of the landscape. That is the regulation of an offering when you're raising capital. But with funds specifically, there is another layer of regulation. That is the Investment Company Act of 1940, which unfortunately we don't learn as much about in law school, and it tends to be a little more obscure. And as a lawyer practicing securities laws, I went a number of years without ever having to think about or touch or read the Investment Company Act of 1940. So my guess is a lot of other securities lawyers may be less familiar with it. So that's what I'm mostly going to talk about, because that ends up being the most important law when it comes to funds. First, let's just briefly go through, on the offering side, that is to say, the 1933 Act and blue sky laws, what are the offering strategies available to you? Well, again, excluding private offerings, because those are not mechanisms of community capital. These are right here are pretty much all of the ways you can raise community capital. the charitable exemption. If you're set up as a charity, you can raise capital under exemptions for charities at the federal level and in many states, not all states, but many states have exemptions for charities. And all the rest of these beyond the charitable one are available to both for-profit and nonprofits. So Reg CF is, obviously gets a lot of attention these days. It just came into existence as a result of the Jobs Act of 2012, but went into a years of experience with Reg CF. It is, the numbers go up every year, so it is becoming a major, a major force here in the community capital space. Up to 5 million now nationwide on a portal. You have to use a portal. Can't do it on your own website, but now with 5 million, it's getting used more and more. Intrastate crowdfunding. That is, a less used type of strategy. While everyone was waiting for the Jobs Act for regulation crowdfunding to come online in 2016, during that interim period before 2016, a lot of states said, well, we're not going to wait for the SEC. We're going to adopt our own crowdfunding law. Many did, about 30 states. Requirements vary by state. Many of them require the use of a portal, which for some fairly complicated reasons makes them perhaps less useful now that Reg CF is out there. Those that don't require a portal turn out to still be quite useful. And so if you're in a state that has one of those laws, definitely keep it in mind. Intrastate direct public offerings. So now we're going to talk about several types of direct public offerings. That term does not refer to any one strategy. It's an umbrella term that refers to several strategies that, what they all have in common is that they're direct. They don't require any intermediary, underwriter, portal. So you can typically you register the offering with your state, and you can then, once they approve it, you can do a public offering in your state. That's the intrastate concept. There's no cap to do that, and no limit, that is to say, on the amount of money you can raise. And every state has direct public offerings. Some people have said, well, I don't think it's legal in my state. No, it's legal in every state. There is no state where you can't do a direct public offering. And it has always been legal since the beginning of time. Well, since at least the advent of securities laws in the 20s or 30s. Every state allows for direct public offerings. If you want to raise capital from multiple states in a DPO, there is a multi-state strategy that it's actually Rule 504 under Reg D that allows you to raise up to 10 million from multiple states. The key is you still have to register in every state where you want to take investment from. And then there is something commonly known as a a community investment trust. It works with real estate, and the idea is it is a bank guaranteed security. So despite the name Community Investment Trust, which is not very descriptive, it doesn't really give you any hint of what it is. The idea is it relies on a bank guarantee of the security you're offering. It's a limited value, but I put it on this list because there's a lot of buzz about it, and people frequently ask us about this idea. And so it's out there. It has some advantages and disadvantages. It's a whole conversation. I won't get into it, but it's to Reg A. Reg A is sort of like a mini IPO. You sort of do almost sort of like a registration with the SEC. It's not really a registration. What they do is they qualify the offering once they're satisfied that you've disclosed everything you need to disclose. 2 tiers of Reg A. Tier 1 is pretty useless because you still have to register at the state level. I actually don't know of any organization that has used Tier 1. They might as well take it off the books. Tier 2 is useful because the securities issued in a Tier 2 Reg A offering are covered securities, which means it preempts state law, which means states cannot require registration. They can require a notice. And that is something to keep in mind, but they can't require registration. So you can do a nationwide offering under Reg A fairly efficiently with a $75 million cap. You simply, as I say, you kind of go through a mini registration process. So those are your legal capital raising strategies for community capital. Now, I will say there may be a couple of others to add to this list in some jurisdictions. For example, in some states like California, there is another exemption for co-ops doing public offerings. So you can raise up to $1,000 per co-op member in California, and some other states I think have similar co-op exemptions, but they vary quite a lot, so I can't make any general rule about those. You know, if you're looking for other exemptions, just look at your local law, and you might find something else that can work for whatever you want to do. So those are your offering strategies. Now, I'm going to continue on and talk about the Investment Company Act. And maybe I should just pause here for just a moment and say, if anyone wants to stop me, Chris, are we taking questions, or Cameron, are we taking questions as we go, or do you want to save questions for the end? I just want to sort of see if, should I pause here for a moment, or should I keep going?
I think we were going to take questions at the end,
Okay.
but yeah.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. Let's keep going then. So the Investment Company Act. Now again, to be clear, you got to have a strategy under both. If you're a fund, you have to have a strategy under both the Investment Company Act and under 1933. It's not an either or. You've got to have an offering strategy and a fund strategy. So it's two different regulatory body or regulatory frameworks that you need to comply with both. So Investment Company Act, it is the law that regulates mutual funds. And if you are within its coverage of its full the full burden of regulations, it's very onerous, and you don't want to go there unless you're talking about a fund with, I don't know, 100 million or more, a mutual fund, and you want to be subject to all those requirements. It limits what kinds of liquid, in other words, publicly traded, and so on. It doesn't get where we want to go. So happily, the Investment Company Act has a number of exemptions or other strategies for staying out of the Investment Company Act, and that's what we're going to focus on here. So I'm not going to get into how to comply with the Investment Company Act if you are a mutual fund. That's, there are big law firms that do that work. I don't want to compete in that space. We're talking about how to stay out of the Investment Company Act, how to not be covered by those laws, because that's where it gets interesting for community scale funds that aren't $100 million or more, and never intend to get to that size. So let's dig into it. So we're mostly going to talk about, well, exemptions, but I use the term exemption broadly because sometimes we're simply talking about staying out of the definition of investment company. And so these are strategies that keep you out of the Investment Company Act. Now, there are a number of them, and there's probably about maybe 25 or so, a couple dozen strategies that you can choose from. And later I'll have there's a link up there, but Chris referenced a handbook that a few of us at NC3 co-authored, Michael Schumann, Janice Shade, and Amy Cortez, and I co-authored this handbook on community investment funds. It's got some really good material. It's available for free on NC3's website. There is a chapter in it that delves more deeply into all the various exemption strategies that you can use, and I'm not going to cover all of them. I'm going to highlight about 5, but with a focus on this last one, Diversified Community Investment Fund. But again, in the spirit of context, I want to just go through a few others just to give you a sense of what we're talking about with these exemptions. So the ones I'm going to talk about today, I group broadly into those with a charitable element. There's a special set of exemptions for charities or funds with a charitable element to it. And then a group of funds that are not covered by the Investment Company Act because they are not primarily in the securities investing business. And I'll get into more detail about what I mean by that in a moment. But let's just briefly talk about the charitable loan fund. I bring that up mainly because of all the types of all the strategies that allow you to build a fund that is open to community capital. The charitable loan fund is the easiest, and it is the one that is, I think, by far the most commonly used. There's probably about 200 of them around the country, all shapes and sizes. Some of them have a more national scope, like RSF, which, by the way, full disclosure, I was their in-house general counsel for about 5 or 6 years. But Calvert Foundation, and then there are some that have more, or many, I should say, that have a more specific geographic scope. Boston Ujima Project really focuses on, of course, the Boston area, as the name suggests. Real People's Fund is focused on 2 counties in the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area, Alameda and Contra Costa County. PV Grows is in Western Massachusetts, the Pioneer Valley. That's PV. It's not, doesn't stand for photovoltaic. It stands for Pioneer Valley. Yeah, California Farm Link, it sort of covers California general. So anyway, but the point is there are many, some bigger, some smaller, and ranging in size from, you know, a few 100,000 perhaps up to RSF's fund, I believe, is over 100 million. I think Calvert's is more than that. At any rate, the idea is if a fund is a charity, it is exempt from the 1940 Act. It's actually a very simple exemption. So that makes it easy. And by the way, we talk sometimes about state laws and federal laws. To my knowledge, no state has an analogy to the 1940 Investment Company Act as a state law. So when it comes to the regulation of offerings, you know, the 33 Act is a federal law, and there are state analogies, state offering law, you know, laws that regulate offerings. But to my knowledge, no state regulates funds in the manner of the 1940 Investment Company Act. So yeah, to be a charitable loan fund, simply you need to be a charity. And as a practical matter, incoming investment must be debt. That's simply because you can't own a charity. So there's no possibility of investing equity capital in a charity. So your incoming investment must be debt. And then all outgoing investments have to further your charitable mission. As a practical matter, outgoing investments from these funds are usually loans. And not because any law requires that they limit their investments to making loans, but simply because they have to meet their debt servicing obligation to their investors, who are lenders. And so they have interest to pay every month. And so they have to make investments that generate sufficient cash flow to cover those obligations to their investor lenders. So most of them invest only in debt. And okay, so maybe I'll continue on from there. It's a great strategy. It's, like I said, it's the most commonly used true community investment fund. And you know, our firm has a number of clients that are using that strategy, and happy to talk with anyone offline about, you know, details of how that might work. But now I want to get into a group of compliance strategies that have as their core theme that they're not primarily in the securities investing business, and therefore not within the scope of. Start out just by mentioning the holding company. Don't want to dwell on that today, but it is a good strategy that I think is underutilized. Basically, if a fund is investing in controlled or majority-owned subsidiaries, in other words, they have at least 51% of the company, they essentially are deemed to be in the business of running their subsidiaries. Now, this assumes that they're acquiring companies with intent to keep them, not intent to sell them. But if they really are, acting as a true holding company, acquiring businesses with intent to hold them, operate them, supervise them, and so on, they'll deem to be in the business of their subsidiaries and not in the business of buying and selling securities. And the key thing there is they may have some minority investments, but which puts them in the securities investing business, but that cannot be their primary business. They need to primarily be in the business of managing their portfolio of securities. This is essentially the model of Berkshire Hathaway. You may notice that they are a holding company. They are not regulated as a mutual fund. If you ever wonder why they aren't a mutual fund, this is it, because they invest in majority or controlling shares of their portfolio companies. They don't just make minority interests. So you can do, obviously that's a very large scale. You can do this at a small scale, community scale too. Gets you out from under the Investment Company Act, and then you can raise capital virtually any manner you want to. And I suggest a couple key uses there. I mean, this is just examples. The other ways you use it, but the idea of having a fund that acquires local businesses that would otherwise be lost to the community because their owners are retiring or might otherwise sell out to an outside entity. This allows you to keep the local character of those businesses and sort of preserve the the employment base and local character of these businesses. And then, another idea that this could be used for is cooperatives. There's a lot of folks who are who like to help businesses convert to cooperatives, and that's great. My firm does some of that. But another way to sort of get to a similar result is to set up a holding company that is itself a cooperative, and then acquire businesses, and though the employees of those businesses become members of your co-op. So it is a fairly efficient way to effectively get to where you have many co-ops, cooperatively owned businesses, except that the holding company is a co-op, and not just the individual businesses owned by the co-op. So anyway, those are just some examples. Let's continue on. Okay, this is going to play directly into the diversified community investment fund model. So let me just explain what I mean here. Again, let me just back up for a second. When you look at the definition of an investment company under the Investment Company Act, and by the way, we often use the word fund, but that's not a legal term under the Investment Company Act. The legal term that they use is investment company. And if you are an investment company, you are within the scope of its laws, unless you can find an exemption. You look at the definition of investment company. Basically, I'll simplify it a little bit, but basically it is an entity that is raising capital via a securities offering and does one of either two things. One, it is primarily in the business of investing in securities, or two, investment securities comprise more than 40% of its assets. So if we want to stay out of the definition of an investment company, you need to do two things. One, you can't be in the primary business of investing in securities. And two, investment securities can't comprise more than 40% of your assets. So that opens up a broad range of ways to do this with other businesses that are not primarily in the securities investing business. So for example, we'll talk about real estate more in a moment, but what if you had or operating a co-working space in your community? You have some real estate, you're bring in people, your clients who are working and using meeting rooms and so on. That's your primary business, right? You're operating this co-working space. If you were also to have a fund, sort of a supplemental fund that invests in some of those same businesses, or perhaps in other businesses that aren't your customers, that is truly your secondary or supplemental line of business, then doing so, that is to say, having that fund does not bring you within the scope of the Investment Company Act, because that isn't your primary business. That is to say, investing in these businesses isn't your primary business. So the same is true if you're run a makerspace, an incubator, accelerator. A food co-op could do this. I mean, you're primary in the business of retail sales of groceries, but you could also invest in the producers of the food that you sell. If you want to help ensure that to help solidify your sort of local supply chain of locally produced groceries, for example, or whatever it may be. You can invest in those businesses. As long as that is not your primary business, you can invest in local companies as a supplemental business without being subject to the Investment Company Act. Very versatile type of strategy. Again, and now that brings us to real estate. So there's actually a couple strategies to use with real estate. There is an exemption in the 1940 Investment Company Act for real estate businesses, and so if at least 80% of your assets are in real estate, and in the law it refers to mortgages or ownership of land, and improvements on land, then you are within an exemption from the Investment Company Act. Now that is one way of being out from under the Investment Company Act. The other way is to simply invest in real estate and not in real estate securities hardly at all, or not much, because real estate fundamentally is not a security. So again, if you go back to the definition of an investment company, it refers to a company that raises capital via securities offering. Okay, let's assume you're doing that, and then invest in securities issued by other companies. But if what you're investing in is real estate, you're not investing in securities issued by other companies. So fundamentally, a fund that truly is a real estate fund investing in real estate is not within the scope of the Investment Company Act, and you don't need to worry about the ICA. So, and it can be any kind of entity, as I note here. It can be an LLC, partnership, or REIT. You probably want some kind of a pass-through entity or a REIT. You probably don't want to set up as a C corporation for tax reasons, although I don't want to delve too deeply into tax issues. That's not my area of expertise, but that's, I think, what most tax advisors would suggest. And I just want to put a little plug here. I think there's a lot of potential for real estate funds to partner with community land trusts. I think there's a great, it could be a marriage made in heaven, as it were, because a community land trust, by acquiring some of the rights in real estate, i.e. development rights, or imposing a conservation easement or whatever local law permits, that can lower the net cost of real estate to the fund. A fund is going to be set up as a for-profit. Community land trust is a nonprofit, but by having the nonprofit community land trust acquire some of the rights and pay some of the acquisition costs, it can lower the net cost to the fund, which helps ensure that it can then take that land and say, offer it out to the community members affordably. If the goal is to preserve affordable housing, for example, or agricultural land, and keep it affordable for, say a new generation of farmers, whatever it may be, that's a strategy that can help you get there. All right, let me move on, because that brings us to the main topic of the day, Diversified Community Investment Fund. Now, this is a strategy 1940 Investment Company Act. It really is just sort of the big picture. It is simply taking these ideas that I just talked about, the supplemental fund and the real estate fund, and saying, well, let's just merge those concepts because they're pretty consistent with each other. And the idea is, if you want to do, say, revitalization in a community, frequently there are multiple elements of that. There's the real estate element, and then there are the local businesses. What if you could invest in both? What if you could invest primarily in real estate and then also invest in these local businesses? And the answer is yes, you can do that. As long as, and you're basically taking, again, both of the concepts of both the supplemental fund concept and the real estate fund concept, and saying, okay, let's say you invest at least 60% of the fund's assets in real estate, and then no more than 40%, but up to 40% can be invested in local companies. That keeps you out of the definition of an investment company, because again, you're not primarily in the securities investing business, you're primarily in the real estate business, and only secondarily in the securities investing business. And then investment securities are not more than 40% of your portfolio. So you simply stay out of the definition of an investment company, while giving you a lot of flexibility, recognizing that real estate is a big ticket item. So if you invest $600,000 in real estate, you can invest up to $400,000 in local businesses. Well, and then you can scale that up as much as you want to. If you invested 60 million in real estate, you can invest 40 million in local businesses. So it's very scalable. And because this keeps you out of the 1940 Act, there is no limit on what means you can use to raise capital. So that gives you everything from the traditional private offering up through any of those community capital strategies that I mentioned earlier, regulation, crowdfunding, direct public offerings, and so on. Not the charitable strategy, because we're assuming this is a for-profit vehicle, but any of the others. And maybe just a brief word. There will be some who will point out that, well, the rules for regulation crowdfunding say you can't use regulation crowdfunding for a fund that would be covered by the 1940 Act, but for one of the exemptions in Section 3B or 3C. And isn't that where the real estate exemption is? Yes, but as I said earlier in the discussion about real estate, there are kind of two pathways for a real estate fund, and if you do, you can't use regulation crowdfunding because it's one of those exemptions in Section 3B or 3C. But you can also take the position, depending on how you do it, that your real estate fund is simply not covered by the Investment Company Act at all. You're not using the exemption, and that allows you to use regulation crowdfunding or any of the other strategies. So it does give you maximum flexibility. And I note here you can offer multiple securities. What I mean by that is, and this is a bigger discussion about why you would want to do that, but you can offer a combination of debt securities and equity. And that way, if some of your potential investors really are comfortable only investing in debt, fixed income securities, fine, you can offer a debt security. Others want to have that potential for appreciation and wealth building that perhaps debt doesn't offer, and you can offer that to them as well. So your community can be co-owners of this fund, not just lenders, but owners with you, and you can distribute those profits to your equity investors. And as noted before, it can offer some liquidity. That's a bigger conversation, but there are strategies that can allow you to redeem investors who need or allow some ability to sell investments if your investors need their money back. There aren't a lot of examples of this fund of this type of fund in use. We are talking with we have several clients right now that we're working with that have yet to roll it out. That is to say, they have yet to make an offering, but are working on it. So hopefully within a year or so, we'll have a number of examples we can add to this list. But right now, some of you may be familiar with Kachua Impact Fund. That is, I don't think that term ever came up while that fund was being developed, but that is essentially a diversified community investment fund, invests primarily in real estate, but also makes some investments in local businesses. So that's kind of the concept. Now I want to, and we could talk more about any of these details, but I just wanted to offer another spin on this, and that is opportunity funds. Opportunity funds is a tax classification, and it came out of the 2017 tax law that's designed to drive investment into lower income communities designated as opportunity zones. If the properties that you want to invest in are in opportunity zones, and if the businesses you want to invest in are based in opportunity zones, you might as well set this up as an opportunity fund. It's not hard to do. You do a filing with the IRS. Again, this is a tax issue, not a securities issue. It has nothing to do with securities law, but I just wanted to point out that there's an opportunity here. Again, if your properties are in these zones, there's an opportunity. Well, two key ones right now. One is if investors roll over capital gains into an opportunity fund, they can defer paying tax on those gains until the end of 2026. So at least it's a deferral. That's not bad. But that's the one that gets talked about a lot. But the next one here is, in the big picture, probably far more important. Any investors' capital gains from investing in the opportunity fund are tax-free if you hold that fund for 10 years. Let me say that again, because that may surprise people. If I invest in an opportunity fund, let's say I invest in a diversified community investment fund that elects to be an opportunity fund. Let's say I invest $1,000 in that fund, and let's say it's true to the promise that we're offering here, that I shouldn't use the word promise because that sounds like a securities promise, but the point is, if it actually increases in value, if my $1,000 becomes $2,000 in 10 years, which is a fairly modest annual rate of return, but again, we're talking about appreciation, not profits distributed. If my $1,000 becomes $2,000 in 10 years, and then I unload my interest either by redeeming it back to the fund or selling it to someone else or whatever it may be, I sell with $1,000 of capital gain. That capital gain is tax-free. I do not pay capital gains tax on that appreciation. That's a huge benefit that is available to anybody. Now, I should put an asterisk there and say that there is a little bit of ambiguity. We've gotten some bad guidance from the IRS about this, so it's a bigger conversation I won't get into. But I believe that is clearly what the law says, even though nobody's tested that yet. That is, in other words, that should be available to anybody, not just investors who roll over capital gains. We can talk offline if anyone wants to dig into that a little bit more deeply. So what does it take to be an opportunity fund? Well, the fund has to have 90% of its assets in opportunity zones, whether they're real estate or investments in local businesses. And by the way, those assets must be either real estate or equity in businesses. It can't, an opportunity fund can't be a lender. It must actually own equity in businesses or well, real estate. It means tangible property generally, but as a practical matter, that means real estate. And then finally, as I suggested, I think earlier, an opportunity fund can be either just a real estate fund, it can be a holding company, but for purposes here, importantly, it can be a diversified community investment fund, which has a portfolio partly in real estate and partly in local businesses. So I'm going to just briefly touch on a handful of other offering strategies, or excuse me, fund strategies under the Investment Company Act. Just kind of give you a flavor of some of the other things you can do. Diversified community investment fund, but are still options available. And let me just check my time. I think I'm almost done talking. I think I'm actually fairly on schedule. The private fund, I acknowledge that because that is by far the most commonly used type of fund under the Investment Company Act. There are probably tens of thousands of those around the country. Every private equity fund, every venture capital fund, every hedge fund is set up as a private fund, no public offering, up to 100 investors. In limited circumstances, you can have up to 250, but I won't go into that for now. Let's assume 100. That's the way they operate, and they raise the capital through private offerings available only to accredited investors, which is precisely why there's such a dichotomy, why wealthy people get to grow their wealth at a rapid clip. But if you're not wealthy, you're not accredited, into the conventional wisdom, you don't get in. You don't get through that gate into the sandbox for the rich. And that's the problem we're trying to solve. So I'm not advocating for private funds. However, I acknowledge it because sometimes, and I think I suggested this before, but sometimes when you're gearing up, when you're setting up a fund that intends to do a true community capital raise down the road, sometimes it's helpful to start it off as a private fund, raise some capital privately, seed the fund, and then go out and do a public raise. So it's there as part of your menu of options. Pooled income fund, I won't dwell on that. That's a little bit more complicated to explain, but it's something it's sort of a hybrid between charitable donation and investment. It's discussed in the handbook I mentioned. I think it's a great idea. It is underutilized. It allows anybody to contribute to a fund that can invest in nearly anything. And that fund can share profits with those contributors. The only catch is you can't ever get your money back. That's the charitable element of it, but you do get a lifetime of income from those investments, and it can be set up to invest in local businesses, makes any kind of investment, whether equity or loan or real estate or whatever it may be. It's a very versatile. Yeah, and anyway, I'll continue on. I've written blogs about that. Like I said, there's something about it in our handbook if you want to learn more. I think it's a great idea. Government-owned fund, I won't dwell on that one much either. But if you had a fund that is fundamentally owned by a government agency or joint powers organization or something like that, you can raise capital. It has to be owned by the government, but it can raise debt capital or revenue share debt capital from the public, make any kind of investment. It's like a charitable loan fund in the sense that it generally only raises debt capital because the government has to own the equity, but it doesn't have to have a charitable purpose for its outgoing investments. And that debt capital it raises from the public could be revenue share, which you probably can't do in a charity because it looks too much like sharing a profit. Flexible device that, again, is underutilized. I actually don't know of any example where that's being used as a community investment fund. So I like to mention it because I think it's a good idea that just hasn't been used. Intrastate fund, there is in theory an exemption under the 1940 Investment Company Act for an intrastate fund. In other words, a fund that raises capital only from investors in their state, theoretically exempt from the 1940 Act, but It's got some unfortunate limitations. It can only raise up to 10 million, and that may not necessarily be a problem, but you sure wish it would be able to raise 25, 50 million. But at any rate, it's 10 million for now. But most importantly, it is not a self-executing exemption. You do have to go to the SEC and ask for an exemptive order, and they have the power to impose any rules they want to, which makes it unpredictable and literally has not been used since the 1970s. I mean, if you look, there is a database of exemptive orders on the SEC's website. You look through them for a fund under this exemption. The most recent one was, I think, 1976. So the SEC, I've talked with folks at the investment management division of the SEC about this, and they recognize that it's clearly not doing what it's intended to do, since no one's used it since 1976. So they recognize that there's a problem. They haven't yet addressed it, but that's another conversation for another day. I'll stop there. As I mentioned, here's the we wrote this handbook on community investment funds. Here's the link, but you don't need to jot this down. Just go to NC3's website and search for community investment funds. I think you'd find it if you want to dig into more detail about this. So that's it. I think that's the end of my presentation. Yeah, just wrap it up with this. The vision here is every member of a community should be able to invest locally and build wealth while helping the community thrive. Any local project or venture gets the kind of capital it needs. And what I mean by that is it's mission aligned capital. It's not extractive capital, because as a venture raising community capital, you're going to get people investing because they want you to succeed. They want you in their community. They want you to thrive. They aren't trying to get as much profit as they can extract from you at all cost to the company. So it's the right kind of capital. And then when this happens, we have thriving, inclusive, and democratic local economies and resilient. When you have a stronger local economy, you can withstand better the gyrations of the national economy and Wall Street, and can survive things better and more. Yeah, maybe I'll leave it there. So let's see. I guess we shift into Q&A. Cameron, is that
yeah,
next?
if you can go ahead and stop sharing your slides if you would like.
Okay.
Yes, thanks, Brian. That was a lot of information.
Yeah, sorry, I talk fast.
It's all right. I think you said we could share the slides, right? So
yes,
that will be
yes. I'll send you. Yes, I'll send you the deck, and you can share it as.
That would be great.
Whoever wants it.
So good reference with that deck for sure. So yeah, I think the takeaway is that if your project has a real estate component and you also want to invest in businesses in your community, the Diversified Community Investment Fund is a good option. There are a lot of other options out there, but as you pointed out, Brian, there are sort of a lot of buts and extra a lot of hurdles that come with those other options. So something to think about if you're thinking about starting a fund, and what the pros and cons are compared to the other options out there. So yeah, we can open it up to Q&A right now. I was thinking that it would be ideal if you can pop your question into the chat for us so we can kind of keep a track of whose questions are coming first. And then if we need to elaborate, we can unmute you and you can elaborate on your question. If that all sounds good for folks. Let's see, Leah Roberts, would love to hear about your favorite examples of pooled income funds. My perspective here is as community foundation staff.
Yeah, so pooled income funds. Okay, so first of all, typically those have been used as a planned giving device. The idea is usually a large institution. They're commonly set up by, say, hospitals or universities, and the approach they used is to say, well, please contribute something to this fund, and we'll preserve that asset. You'll get income for life, and then when the income beneficiaries have all died, then that asset is taken out of the trust. It's actually set up as a trust and handed over to the charity. And by planned giving device, I mean it's in that sense it's sort of akin to, if y'all are familiar with a charitable remainder trust. The idea of a charitable remainder trust is I put an asset into a trust. I get the benefit of it for life, so I can even put my house into a trust. I get the benefit of for life, meaning I get to live in the house for the rest of my life, and those beneficiaries I choose, myself, my wife, my kids, or whatever, get it for life. And when all the life beneficiaries have died, then that asset the trust is dissolved, and that asset goes to the charity. So from the charity's point of view, it's a way of locking in a long-term gift. You're setting up the trust. You're going to get the gift. That is, again, from the charity's point of view, that sets us up. You're going to get the gift. It may be a few years down the road. It may be 5, 10, 20 years down the road, but it's going to come. And so, these planned giving devices are usually, designed with a very long term in mind. Well, the pooled income fund basically operates similarly. Now, there are some nuanced tax differences, and tax is not my area of expertise really, but I understand that the tax benefits of a pooled income fund are actually better than for a charitable remainder trust, even though the concept is the same. The additional advantage of a pooled income fund is a single entity, a single trust can take in contributions from anybody. A charitable remainder trust is usually set up only for big grants or donations by very wealthy people who want to contribute a big asset. But a pooled income fund is a very efficient device that can sort of really democratize that. Anybody can contribute, even $1,000 or whatever, $10,000 or something. You can set whatever minimum you want to. But the idea is you make a contribution to the trust, the pooled income fund, and similarly that trust will hold that asset. It's usually cash, but it can be other non-cash assets. But they'll hold that asset, invest it, generate returns from those assets, and distribute all the returns to the life beneficiaries for everyone's life. And so if I make a contribution, I'm going to designate the life beneficiaries, and my life beneficiaries, myself, my wife, my kids, my grandkids, if I have some at the time, it has to be a life in being at the time the contribution is made. But anyway, those life beneficiaries will get their distribution for everyone's life. When all of those life beneficiaries have died, that asset is taken out of the trust and handed over to the charity. Now, the point that I was making is these are usually designed and built by big institutions specifically to lock in this flow of charitable assets in future years, and it is operated with an intent to maximize or preserve the value of the asset, and so usually invested in very low return securities like treasuries or bond funds or something, with a view toward maximizing safety. And so the actual life income that these folks get is usually very low. What I'm suggesting is sort of a rethinking of that, because actually the rules for pooled income funds, this is a whole conversation, but the rules are much more versatile. You don't have to invest in only the most secure fixed income investments. You can actually invest in local businesses. You can make equity investments in local businesses. You can invest in local real estate. It's a lot more versatile than the big institutions may think. And so I'm suggesting.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah.
We've got several other questions, so if you can wrap that up, we'll go to the other questions.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. I really get going when I talk about these things. But anyway, yes. So this can be used as a true community investment fund with that charitable element, and maybe I'll just wrap it up there. So I know we have limited time and more questions. So let's go ahead. Let's go on to another.
So here's the next questions from Kevin Jones. Could we get a recap of the DCIF itself and where it might work? Who's looking at it and what's needed to launch it, a CDC, a CDFI, or question mark?
Okay, all right. So now we get into sort of the pragmatic details. So again, to recap a little bit of what I said, but some of that goes into some other topics. So thank you. Thanks, Kevin. So fundamentally, a DCIF is one that, the idea is that it is invested primarily in real estate. So this is a real estate fund that also invests up to 40% of its assets in local businesses, in local companies, in any kind of investment. It can be equity, debt, revenue share, whatever you want, as long as at least 60% of its assets is real estate, and real estate is actually its primary business. And I won't get into the nuances of what constitutes a primary business. The SEC there is some guidance out there, and there are some cases that talk about factors that we can use to determine what really is your primary business. That's probably a conversation we could say for another day. But let's assume that there are some criteria you can use to make sure that you're actually in the primary business of real estate. And that basically takes you out of the Investment Company Act. And the beauty of that is you don't have all that heavy burdensome regulation that the Investment Company Act would impose. You can raise capital through any means you want to. So who's looking at this? Who sets it up? It's very versatile. So anyone who wants to set up a fund to invest, to channel local investment into local businesses. So usually the folks that are coming to us are, frequently they are folks that are, say, that have a local, economic development corporation or something, an EDC or some similar type of entity, or maybe a local foundation. And so we're often talking to folks that have a local nonprofit and are saying, we want to create a wealth building opportunity for our community. And that, implies a for-profit vehicle. So frequently it's a charity. Some questions, and we have to be careful that the structure of this is set up so that it doesn't jeopardize a tax-exempt status. And there's some things that you can do to make sure that to protect the charity. So it can be done in a way that doesn't jeopardize the tax-exempt status of the charity. And you also want to watch for things like unrelated business income and so on. But that is, I will say, that's typically who we're talking to about setting one of these up. Not always. Sometimes it's just, a community activist who isn't affiliated with a local nonprofit, or perhaps is a real estate professional who has been doing real estate development, but is frustrated that they can't do some other things that they want to do and want to go beyond real estate, or perhaps go beyond the usual accredited investor community and wants to create wealth building opportunities for anybody. So I guess the answer to the question is, a lot of people are looking at this. So and a lot of folks can get it started, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit company or simply an activist in your community and want to see this happen. It's very versatile. There were other parts of that question. I forget what the others were.
Well, again, let's get to some other questions and what can circle back. Amy Short asked about how does one bench search for pro-social funds to support? I'll answer that one, Amy. There isn't a great way right now. So one of the things that's evolving right now, because we're hearing from lots of folks, organizations, businesses, communities that are wanting to make these kinds of decisions. So we're seeing some interesting things happen. I would point to Honeycomb Credit, which is partnering with foundations right now. So it's an investment crowdfunding platform. And they are set up so the foundations can invest alongside the community investors, either as seed money at the front end or match money. And so that's an interesting way. We expect going forward, as we set up DCIF funds and others set up similar funds, there are going to be more examples of that. And there is actually a group of investment advisors that is an independent group. They aren't with any of the big houses, and they're really focused on that. If you contact us, we can connect you with those folks. So next is from Robert Woods. Can you talk about the hurdles for setting up and running a DCIF? Talk about one example you use in their experience so far. So Robert, I'm going to qualify this one. So we haven't set up a DCIF yet right now. We're contracted right now in the city of Detroit and the city of Cincinnati, and with some colleagues that are on the call from Rhode Island to set up DCFIs there. So we don't have that example. Give us a call in about 6 months and we can talk a little bit more about it. What we do know is that we can there's a lot of options in terms of how we set this up. So one of the things we're doing is coming into communities. We're looking at the assets they have. We're recommending partner firms. But as we said kind of at the outset, a DCFI can be a standard of a local unit of government. So there are lots of opportunities, and there are lots of opportunities in terms of how we raise capital into it. Brian, I don't know if you want to talk anything else about that, or we can go to the next question.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Great.
Yeah, continue.
So this is from Eric Kensington. I'm not sure that we'll be able to get your answer exactly to you, Eric, because you have a pretty specific request. I'm primarily interested in investment models used to support below market housing options for sale or rent. These might be tied to a land trust. Are there examples administered by local credit unions as a modified CD or other product that limits investment to workforce housing? I don't have any knowledge of any of those specific. I don't know if anybody else does.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure I see it obvious, sort of match with credit unions because, well, I mean, obviously there's a place for loans in this kind of a structure, but I think what you're probably, the model that would probably work best is more of a simple real estate fund, not so much the diversified community investment fund, which has as its sort of core concept that you're primarily in real estate, but can also invest in local companies, local businesses. But here, if you're really focused on real estate exclusively, that is to say low income housing or moderate, affordable housing, then we can dispense with the the local businesses element and just set up a real estate fund, a for-profit real estate fund that can be set up as a LLC or perhaps even a REIT, and yes, it can partner. I talked about this a little bit. It can partner with a community, a real estate trust to help offset some of the cost of acquiring property and be able to lease housing out affordably. But I think in terms of what is the model for that, we're probably just talking about a simple real estate fund.
Great. Okay. Here's the next question. This is a very specific, good DCIF. Under the DCIF model, do investments in real estate need to be made directly, or could the same goal be achieved by investing in special purpose vehicles, which in turn hold the real estate asset?
Yeah, good question. So in most cases, a real estate fund will probably set up a separate subsidiary LLC to hold each property. For purposes of 1940 Act compliance, I think you could regard that as basically equivalent to holding the property directly. And the reason is because, or I should maybe put the caveats there. The reason is because so say we're a fund, we acquire a piece of real estate, we set up an LLC just to hold that real estate. It's solely to sort of contain liability, but it's a disregarded entity and so on. The idea there is in an LLC, if it's a single member LLC that is the manager of the LLC, so your managing member, your investment in that LLC is not a securities interest. It is not a securities transaction. That's the key thing. That is not, you are not in the securities investing business because a managing membership interest in the LLC is not a security. So for our purposes here, it's treated just as if you are holding the real estate directly. So there's no problem with holding it through SPVs that are set up as member managed single member LLCs. Now, that would be different if you're talking about, acquiring a passive investment interest, i.e. non-managing membership interest in an LLC managed by someone else, because then that is a security. So this gets into that, some nuanced discussion of what constitutes a security and what isn't. But let's just say, sole member manager managed, member managed LLCs should be no problem.
Great. Okay. I'm going to return to another question from Kevin. So we've just articulated, the question is who's doing a DCIF, where is there a community of practice emerging? I identified the places where we're contracted. So Detroit, Cincinnati, and Rhode Island. We also have another half dozen communities that are in conversation with us. And we are convening a cohort of those communities together to learn from each other as we go through the process. So great question. Then I think I saw another one from Amy, or just a comment. Let's get a DCIF going for folks to invest in with self-directed retirement funds you're singing Michael Schumann's tune there, right?
Yeah.
For sure. So, and
Yeah.
others, we think that's a great idea, and we really expect these DCIFs as they evolve to become great places for all kinds of interesting funding, which is not going to Main Street and needs to. Let's see. Next, we've got a question from Matthew. It sounds like co-ops can follow any of these fund strategies, holding company like Oberon, supplemental, example of food co-op and investing in farmers real estate fund, Northeast Investment Co-op in Minnesota, and in theory, DCIF. Are there any special considerations for co-ops looking to form an investment co-op specifically, such as how patronage dividends might be changed, having member owners as investors? And then the follow-up question, could potentially any type of ownership model of co-op, either consumer, worker, or producer, potentially pursue the DCIF so long as it can meet the real estate and supplemental criteria?
Well, I will say, generally speaking, are neutral as to what kind of entity it is. So, you know, whether it's a co-op, an LLC, a partnership, or a corporation, it's the same securities laws that apply equally. Now, your choice among those choices is driven by other considerations, like, you know, how you want to govern it and how you want to handle the taxation. But tax and securities law are very different spheres. Not that there is no overlap, but there's not much overlap. So yes, and you can use this strategy for a co-op. Now, I guess the question that it raises for me is if it's, you know, if it's a worker co-op in a way that I guess I'm having a, yeah, it wouldn't really be a DCIF. I'm thinking, you know, if you had a worker co-op doing whatever it may be, it's in some operating, you know, what doesn't matter. Let's just say a restaurant, a co-op restaurant, or a grocery store, a food co-op. I don't think, I mean, it wouldn't be primarily in the real estate business. So it wouldn't be technically the DCIF as we've described it here, but let's bring it back to that idea of the supplemental investment fund. That grocery co-op could certainly invest in local businesses. And as long as that investing in local businesses does not become its primary business, it's in the primary business of doing whatever it does, the grocery business, then you're good. Then you basically have what I described as a supplemental fund, and you can invest, again, up to, you know, a substantial portion of your assets in local businesses, and you're good to go. Now, trying to reconcile a co-op with a real estate fund is a little harder.
I'm wondering, Brian, if like a multi-stakeholder co-op situation could maybe be pursued in that case.
So, okay, so maybe an example, let's think about this. And one example is, you know, many of you are familiar with the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. And yes, I think you could do that. That's an example where it could work. So you have, from a securities law standpoint, you could say this fund is primarily a real estate fund. Real estate comprises most of its assets. Could you invest in other businesses, in other local companies? Yes. Under securities law, that's exactly what it contemplates. Now, as a, you know, I think that is a multi-stakeholder co-op, but it's primarily, yeah, by the way, I'm not a client. I don't know the inner workings of how that works. My understanding is one class of co-op members are the residents, and so they effectively are co-owners of this whole real estate fund. They also have investor members, and that's fine too. But yeah, I can see that. If you do model something along the lines of the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, yes, you could do this. Yeah, DCIF as a co-op, yes.
Yeah, I think they also have a worker member class as well. I think we have one more question that we have time for. Can you start as a real estate fund and morph into a DCIF seamlessly? Yeah,
absolutely. So the idea is you don't need to decide on this pathway from the beginning. You can just start out as a real estate fund. And down the road, if you decide you want to make investments into local companies, yes, there is no change in your legal strategy. I guess sort of the message here is that being a real estate fund actually gives you a lot of flexibility. If you say I'm a real estate fund, great, but you have the potential to invest a substantial portion of your assets in local companies and still qualify as fundamentally or I should say primarily a real estate fund, and be within, be excluded from the 1940 Investment Company Act and still have all the capital raising options of any other real estate fund. So yes, you definitely could. You can do it down the road.
Awesome.
Great.
I think that was all the questions. Thanks everyone for joining. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. I have a couple of forms I wanted to share with you. One is a evaluation and impact survey. Another is something that we wanted to kind of introduce you to, particularly for the attorneys that joined this call, is that we understand that this model could be really exciting and that there is a desire to create funds, DCIF or otherwise, and that we need to, part of our mission is to, or part of our work is growing the ecosystem to support the growing number of community investment funds. So we're going to be launching a legal training cohort series, hopefully in June, but we're still finalizing speakers and dates and so forth. But if you are an attorney or know an attorney who might be interested in this, please check out the form that I've dropped in the chat and fill that out, and we will reach out to you when we are ready to launch that, which will hopefully be soon. Like I said, we're hoping for June. And then I think that is everything that we've got for you. Chris or Brian, anything else you want to say?
Again, just really appreciate you being here. We know there was a lot of information. This is the pain that all of us suffer when we talk to Brian on a regular basis. We drink from the fire hose, but there's actually some really good stuff in the fire hose, so we're happy to do that. But we recognize that we need longer, slower conversations that are more specific to the communities or the organizations you represent, and we welcome those contacts. So reach out to us. And we will be happy to chat with you individually, talk about your individual circumstances. The reality is that the fund that we've talked about today, that the DCIF really can fit in a lot of spaces. That's one of the things we like about it. It has the fundamental values that we all agree on, and it's very adaptable. It can fit in a lot of places. And if it's not the right one, we'll tell you as well. Or if we don't think it's the right one, we'll tell you and advise you to get some advice elsewhere. But we do want to take advantage of the momentum that's happening right now across the country and all the folks that are trying to do such good work, and appreciate you sharing your time and energy and all that valuable stuff with us.
All right, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and week.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.